It's raining outside. I'm standing near the door of my wife's lover, who cheated on me for 11 years of our marriage. I wanted to look into the eyes of the man who destroyed my family. I prepared the divorce papers and gathered all the necessary evidence. But when I knocked on the door, I realized that this was my biggest mistake. I never considered myself lucky, but by the age of 28, I had achieved good results and owned my own business. My life changed when I met Elizabeth. It was at a charity event that my friends had persuaded me to attend. She was volunteering, and her smile captivated me from the first moment. "Do you often attend such events?" I asked her, approaching. The question seemed silly to me, but I was just shy. "Yes, I like being here. And you?" Her eyes sparkled with interest. "Honestly, this is my first time, but now it seems I'll be appearing here more often." I smiled, and we both laughed. We spent the entire evening talking about everything. It was so natural and relaxed, as if we had known each other for years. By the end of the evening, I realized I didn't want our conversation to end. "Maybe we could meet for coffee tomorrow," I tentatively suggested. "I wouldn't mind," she said with a smile. From that evening on, I began to court her, trying to meet her at every opportunity. I had experience in relationships before, but they all ended disastrously when it came to marriage. They seemed to vanish at the snap of a finger. But Elizabeth was the one. After a day, Elizabeth said yes. I knew I had hit the mark. We were busy preparing for the wedding and then building and renovating our home, in which my older brother Steve, who was in the military, was a great help. It wasn't just a house, but our nest into which we put all our love and dreams. When our first child was born, I thought there couldn't be a happier person in the world. Elizabeth was a wonderful mother, and I admired her every day. "Do you think he looks like me?" she asked one day, holding our newborn son in her arms. "Without a doubt. He has the same eyes full of curiosity and wonder at the world," I replied, looking at him with incredible tenderness. Then came our second child, our daughter, and our family grew even stronger. I remember painting her room in light tones together, choosing furniture, and decorating her little world. Those moments were filled with such joy that I couldn't imagine living any other way. Life went on, filled with the laughter of our children, family dinners, and warm evenings by the fireplace. I continued to focus on my business and contributed significantly to the family, wanting us to be strong and unbreakable. Elizabeth took on the upbringing of the children while I worked. Sometimes, Elizabeth would leave the children with her parents or mine to attend to her own affairs. She went to fitness classes and also swam in the pool once a week. But over time, I began to notice strange things about my wife. She used to be delighted when I came home, but now her greetings became colder. One evening, when I came home full of news about my day, her reaction was not as before. "Imagine, I had to fire such a guy today," I started. But she just glanced at me briefly and continued to scroll through her phone. She distractedly murmured, not looking up. "That's great." I tried not to pay attention to it, telling myself that maybe she was just tired or worried about something. But when these moments began to repeat again and again, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. "Elizabeth, is everything okay?" I asked once, trying to look into her eyes. "Yes, of course. Just tired," she replied. But her voice sounded distant. It became hard for me. I noticed she spent less time with the children, and the house slowly started to decline. She had always been so active and caring, but now it seemed she didn't care. There were days when I came home to find that dinner wasn't ready and the kitchen was a mess. Once, I even found burnt soup on the stove while she sat enchanted with her phone. This was unlike her. I tried to find out what the problem was, but every attempt to start a conversation ended with her joking it off or saying everything was fine. The decision to hire a detective didn't come to me immediately. Before taking this step, I browsed internet forums and analyzed my wife's behavior, and most signs pointed towards infidelity. I reached out to an old friend who had recently divorced his wife after she had an affair with their neighbor. So I trusted his judgment on this matter, and he provided me with the contact details of a private detective, recommending him as a professional in his field. "Are you sure you want to do this, John?" he asked when I sought his advice. He had been through a tough divorce, and when I shared my problem, he only expressed sympathy. "I just want to be sure for my own peace of mind," I replied, realizing I had no other choice. I was working almost every day, so I couldn't afford to keep tabs on my wife myself, and she wasn't sharing anything with me. So this was the only way out for me. I had tried everything to figure out what the problem was, but Elizabeth wouldn't engage. The meeting with the detective took place in a small cafe. He was a serious and focused man, listening attentively without interrupting. "I understand how difficult this is for you," he said when I had finished. "I will do my best." We discussed the details, and I provided him with all the necessary information, photographs of Elizabeth, her schedule, her phone number. He promised to act discreetly and efficiently. Therefore, I gave him an advance without any reservations. "How soon can I expect news?" I asked as we were parting. "Give me a couple of weeks. I'll contact you as soon as I have something concrete," he replied, and we shook hands. Returning home, my main and perhaps most important task was to avoid arousing suspicion and to maintain a calm lifestyle. The month passed incredibly slowly, with each day dragging on, and I felt like I was gradually losing my mind. Every day I awaited a call from the detective, and when he finally called, my heart raced in anticipation and fear. "We have something to discuss. Shall we meet at the same cafe?" His voice sounded neutral, but I sensed that the news would be serious. Arriving at the meeting, I saw him sitting at a table with a large folder. His face was focused, and I understood that a difficult conversation awaited. "John, I've gathered enough material to give you a clear picture of the situation," he began, opening the folder. In front of me lay photographs, video recordings, audio recordings, and 5 sheets of text detailing every move my wife had made over the past month. Perhaps the most disgusting was a video of my wife having sex, and my worst fears were confirmed. But I hadn't expected that my wife's lover would turn out to be my own older brother, Steve. If we go back in time, Steve was a military man without a family. He spent all his money in bars and on women. He traveled through the states, being transferred from one base to another. The last time I saw him was at our father's birthday 4 years ago, and I had no idea he had returned to our town because no one had informed me. I felt the world around me beginning to crumble. Seeing the evidence of betrayal was unbearable, my heart filled with bitterness and pain. "How long do you think this has been going on?" My voice trembled as I asked. "Based on the evidence, a few months. But in reality, I think a couple of years, if not more. The fact is, they act like experienced lovers. Your wife hasn't left any clues and has been very cautious, which indicates the duration of their relationship. If it's any consolation, judging by your wife's behavior, her meetings with your brother Stevie don't seem to bring her any pleasure. And I think there's much more to it than meets the eye," the detective replied. "I'm very sorry." Sitting in that cafe, I tried to gather my thoughts. I didn't know what to do next. Everything seemed pointless. How could I face Elizabeth and look her in the eyes knowing the truth? How could I talk to my brother after such betrayal? "What should I do now?" I asked the detective. But I understood that I had to find the answer myself. He sighed. "It's up to you. But if I were you, I would discuss everything with your wife. Considering you have all the evidence, you can confront her, and maybe you'll learn something important." I thanked the detective and left the cafe. As soon as I entered the house, Elizabeth sensed something was wrong. Her look was questioning, yet it also showed concern. "Can we talk?" My words came out heavily, and I felt my throat tighten with tension. "Sorry, but I'm busy," she said, though she was just sitting on the sofa looking at her phone. The kids were already asleep. "I don't care. We need to talk," I said firmly. I pulled out the folder with the evidence and threw it on the coffee table. Her hands trembled slightly as she saw it. "What is this?" Her voice sounded tense. "Evidence of your betrayal." The words came out sharper than I expected. "With my brother." Elizabeth paled. For a moment, a heavy silence hung in the room. "John, she began, but fell silent, as if unsure what to say next. Her face quickly changed. She looked guilty, as if her parents were scolding her for another bad grade at school. "How could you?" My disappointment and anger made my voice quiver. "I trusted you more than anything in the world. We were building a family together. How could you do this behind my back?" Elizabeth lowered her eyes, her hands clenching the edge of the tablecloth. "I didn't know how to tell you. It started so innocently, and then everything spiraled out of control." "Innocently?" My laugh sounded bitter. "Infidelity is never innocent." "It happened a few days before our wedding," she began. and I felt my heart squeeze even tighter. I was at a party with the girls. There was a lot of alcohol, and your brother also came to us. She paused for a moment and continued. He was drinking and flirting with me. He slapped my butt. I was completely lost in the moment, and then literally in an instant, I woke up the next day next to him in some hotel room. I listened to her intently, trying to recall how this could have happened 11 years ago. It had been a long time, and I was shocked to learn about all this after so many years. He recorded everything, she managed to say. And after the wedding, when you were busy at work, he began to blackmail me. I didn't know what to do. I was afraid it would destroy our family, destroy you. But just a couple of weeks later, he left and we started to build our life. Stevie backed off from me, and I thought it would never happen again. But every year when he returned from business trips, the first thing he did was write to me. And as long as he was in town for a couple of weeks, I was forced to satisfy his needs. And now, she hesitated. He has returned and has been living in the city for a couple of months, terrorizing me. Elizabeth was struggling to get the words out. She was crying, and I felt sorry for her. Why didn't you tell me right away? I asked, though deep down, I understood the horror she was going through. I was afraid of losing you, our family. I thought I could somehow fix this, but I was wrong. It seemed to me that I missed the moment exactly when I cheated on you at that party, and I felt that I could never confess this to you. Her voice trembled with tears. The conversation was difficult. Learning the details of betrayal from a loved one was unbearable. Yet, at the same time, I saw genuine remorse and pain in her eyes. I need some time to process all this, I finally said after she finished. I don't know if we can ever get back what we had, but I promise to think about what we should all do moving forward. She nodded, unable to utter a word. I stood up and left the room, leaving her alone with her thoughts and guilt. I rushed out of the house filled with anger, not just towards her, but also towards my brother, who had played a part in this treacherous game behind my back. I decided I had to confront him face to face to find out why he did this to me, his brother. I found out from Elizabeth where Steve was temporarily staying, so I headed straight there. He was living in a hostel, which I found odd, considering he chose not to stay with our parents. When he opened the door and saw me, his expression instantly changed. He realized I knew the truth. What are you doing here? His voice was tense. You owe me an explanation, I said, trying to keep my emotions in check. About what you did. Are you drunk or something? Steve said. He was twice my size, incredibly foolish. I looked into his dumb face and, unable to hold back, I punched him in the face, which turned out to be a terrible idea. Because within seconds, I was on the floor with his hefty body on top of me, mercilessly beating me in the face. He seemed to lose all control and continued to pummel me mercilessly. I don't know how long it lasted, but I lost consciousness a couple of times until a few guys and the hostel administrator, attracted by my screams, pulled Steve off me. I was utterly confused about what was happening. I just lay there, unable to move. Then an ambulance arrived and I was taken to the hospital. I was already at the hospital when the doctor informed me that I had suffered a second-degree concussion and needed to stay in the hospital. I had dizziness and severe nausea. My face was swollen. I had sustained serious injuries. That same evening, the police arrived at the hospital to take my statement. I didn't lie and told them exactly how it happened, that I started the fight. But Steve beat me up, causing complications. I filed a report against Steve, and during the legal proceedings, I had to be under medical observation to assess the severity of my injuries. I also received stitches for a few cuts on my face. Elizabeth came to me at the hospital that same evening, leaving the children with her parents. She showed clear concern and took care of me, which continued for 3 days until I was discharged from the hospital and Elizabeth and I went home. I didn't try to bring up the topic of her infidelity because I wasn't up to it. Even 3 days later, I continued to feel nauseous, and now I was plagued by headaches. I didn't expect my meeting with my brother to end this way, but time can't be turned back. If I had known he was such a monster, I wouldn't have gone to him, but on the other hand, I had good reasons to punish him. As soon as Elizabeth and I arrived home, I went into the living room and wanted to get the divorce papers from the cabinet. But when I opened it, I couldn't find them. I turned and looked at Elizabeth. "Where are the documents?" I asked. And she just nodded her head, indicating she didn't know what documents I was talking about. "We need to talk," I began, as we sat opposite each other. Her look was filled with anxiety, but at the same time, it bore hope. I understand you found the divorce documents and hid them, and now you're trying to convince me that you have no idea about them. Has your love for me awakened? And I am grateful for you taking care of me while I was in the hospital. I appreciate it. But understand, how can I trust you going forward if you continue to deceive me over such trifles? John, She tried to say something, but I raised my hand, stopping her. I've made a decision. My voice sounded tired, but firm. I can't continue living this way. Too much has changed between us, and I can't forgive the infidelity. It seems better for both of us to get a divorce. Elizabeth turned pale, and I saw tears stream down her cheeks. I knew it, she whispered. I was so afraid of this, but I understand you. I apologize for everything I've done. I never wanted to hurt you. We both sat in silence for a few minutes, absorbed in our thoughts and feelings. It was hard to realize that our marriage, built on love and trust, was ending this way. I was angry at myself for not seeing the monster in my brother, though he always wanted to appear kind and friendly. I'm glad you understand me, but it will be hard for me to live under the same roof with you after everything I've learned. I realize you wanted to portray yourself as the victim, but nothing was stopping you from talking to me. My feelings for you are gone. I feel nothing for you anymore. I'm sorry. If this sounds hurtful and painful, I never wanted it to happen, I said. And Elizabeth cried and returned to me my divorce papers, which she had signed voluntarily. I didn't want to ruin Elizabeth's life because I knew she would have to raise 2 children. I would help out with money and time, but now I won't always be there. I moved into a hotel for a while and lived there. I hired a lawyer to sue Steve. I wanted to punish him. I visited a doctor every week, and he checked on my health, and not everything was fine. After being beaten by Steve, my vision worsened, forcing me to buy lenses. I also experienced increased intracranial and arterial pressure, causing constant headaches and fatigue. It became difficult for me to concentrate on anything, and sometimes when I was driving, I could feel nauseous. All this was recorded in my medical book, and soon these documents were presented in court as evidence. The trial was scheduled 2 months after the incident. With my lawyer's help, we managed to have Steve kept in custody during this time because I was genuinely afraid of him. Steve complained to my parents that I wanted to imprison my own brother, but I didn't care about my parents' opinion. I was afraid to tell them what really happened, so I kept delaying that moment. During the trial, my lawyer provided evidence that my health had significantly deteriorated after the beating. My face was still hurting and was slightly swollen even 2 months later. Surveillance camera footage was also presented in court, where I saw for the first time that Steve had been hitting me continuously for 3 minutes without stopping. It was a lot. He behaved like an unbalanced person, and his situation was worsened by the fact that he was also a military man with a good rank. Such behavior is unacceptable for military personnel. As a result, Steve had to pay me a substantial compensation, pay a fine, and spend 2 years in prison. After the trial against Steve, the divorce proceedings followed. We both decided to divorce by mutual consent. I left her the house and her car, and the children stayed with her. We agreed that I would visit our children every week and pay child support. I had doubts about whether the children were mine, so I insisted on doing a DNA test to verify if I was their biological father. It turned out I was, which was a relief in a way. I bought myself a small apartment to start with and continued with my business. My parents refused to talk to me because their son, i.e., my marriage, ended up in prison. But I didn't feel guilty about it. However, 4 months after Steve was imprisoned, my parents persuaded me to visit him just for a talk. I decided to make this concession to mend things with my parents. We met with Steve in the common room where there were large metal tables for talks with prisoners and the chairs were welded to the floor. Steve sat opposite me, and we silently looked at each other for a few minutes. "You destroyed my family," I managed to say, trying to catch my breath. He didn't respond, just looked at me with regret and shame. I hoped he would try to explain something to me, and I wanted to get him to talk. I started reminiscing about our childhood, how good we had it together, how we played, and how distance grew between us over time. Steve listened attentively, showing he cared about our relationship. Eventually, I got him to say his first words, "Forgive me, brother." And after that, Steve confessed that it was because of him that girls left me when things got serious towards marriage. He deliberately slept with my women and then blackmailed them because he didn't want me to have a happy life. He was jealous that I managed to build my own business and that I was always surrounded by many women. He told me about how he blackmailed Elizabeth and how she almost wanted to end her life, but he talked her out of it, portraying himself as a hero. I couldn't stand it and spat in his face, saying, "If you're jealous, envy in silence, bastard." Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.